welcome to the Analytics Heroes podcast by Modern Data 101, the one and only platform for all things data products and purpose driven analytics. My name is Abhyuday Verma, Community Manager at Modern, and I'll be your host. So, today I'm honored to host Ryan Brown, a top data engineering voice who has donned multiple hats as an analyst, engineer, consultant, and now an architect. He has had over 5 years of experience working with ETL data pipelines and visualization, focused on creating more optimized data infrastructures. Currently, he's serving as a senior data engineer architect at Trace 3. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Super excited to be here. All my little posting on LinkedIn, and now here I'm doing my first interview. So it's great stuff. Very, very happy to be here.
So let's dive right into the first question. Could you share a bit about your experience exploring different data platforms like Snowflake, Fabric, or Databricks?
So Fabric is making waves, Microsoft's answer to Databricks, and Power BI with everything in Azure for data literally shoved into one thing, right? So we were doing a Fabric implementation at an insurance organization, standard medallion architecture, bronze, silver, gold, utilizing a combination of Python for bronze, T-SQL for silver, and T-SQL for gold to work with that a triplicate of workspaces and those types of things to work for it. That project in particular was really interesting because there was actually some internal dispute on the team about which tool to use. I mean, we like drama, right? So here's some juicy drama. There was internal dispute about Databricks versus Fabric. Databricks won out, so I had to perform the first, to my knowledge, first for me, Fabric to Databricks migration of the code base of the code base. Now, this didn't turn out to be as much of a bugaboo as it could have been, because a lot of our work was in notebooks. The rise of the notebook engineer, you might have heard of that. The notebook engineer, but the modern data platforms, what they do really well, and I think is a great evolution from the Jupyter Notebook vibe. You may have used Jupyter Notebooks at some point in your career, or someone in your audience probably has. Yeah. The helpful evolution there is that Jupyter Notebooks, the .ipynb file is a big cluster of JSON. When you actually look at the file, and that is difficult to work with, versus at least Databricks and Fabric. I haven't worked enough with Snowflake to really know, but Databricks and Fabric, they're whatever the notebooks are whatever the language of the thing you're working with. So the .py or .py, the .sql or .sql, and that means that from a migration perspective or a organization perspective, you can operate on the files directly. So what I really liked that I did from that project, and for me, my kind of vibe is if it's more technical, I should do it more technically. If it's drag and drop, click and stop, I shouldn't do that. Now, that's me, but I always find that there is, how shall I say, victory to be won in pursuing the technical, because there's always a capability that the drag and drop leaves off, because drag and drop has to be supported, drag and drop has to be tested, drag and drop has to be all this other stuff with HTML, CSS, or whoever they've built it. They've built the interface. Yeah. So by definition, and then teams have to support it, and it's a mess, right?
Yeah.
So I was able to use a combination of shell scripting, in particular the fish shell. So your listeners may or may not have heard of the fish shell, right? That is so you may have heard of Bash and talking about Bash. That's shell scripting, right? That's shell scripting in a Unix system using programs to do things. Fish is a shell, very like kind of an evolution off of that tradition. It's non-POSIX compliant, so it's a different vibe. So then you have issues with the compatibility or whatever. So it's not like you can run a Bash script on a KQL or on a KSH system and stuff like that. So you lose that, which is not great. But yeah, I like some of the syntax and other pieces of that. So I used a combination of EXA, which is the evolution of LS. So, LS hyphen LA, EZA, or EZA is the next modification, is the next iteration off of that, to pull all the files and then use SED, so stream editor, the stream editor program, to go into the files and change pieces. So because the dot, so I did a couple of things. I had to do .py to .sql, right? So that's using CP to change the file extension on all those files, and then stream editor to change the content of those files. Because yes, they're both .py files, and they denotate where's a command or a cell. Or I think Fabric calls them cells. Databricks calls them Databricks used to call them commands. Now I think they call them cells, because I think everybody's like, they're cells, bro.
Yeah.
But I still think in the underlying Python, it's going to be like command. So to change those patterns and to remove other things, so that way so that way I could accomplish that migration. So that's something I'm kind of proud of. That was really fun. That was really nerdy to accomplish, and that may be at least the first, to my knowledge, of a migration from Fabrics to Databricks. And industry-wise, at least as we're talking right now, there may be a little bit of that happening, because Fabric is new to the scene. They're working on adding new features. We were always looking at the roadmap, seeing what they were doing. So that was one project that I did, and that's the thing I'm proud of. And so in line with the optimizing infrastructure, optimizing things, right? That's where I go to, and that's kind of what I'm proud of to have
What are some
delivered
key
there.
challenges you have faced when working with APIs to automate deployments and manage authentication in your projects?
Second project I was working on was a kind of a Fabric exploration of what, in particular, what the API was capable of, for specifically potentially automated deployment of workspaces and endpoints and things of that nature. So Fabric, this is my take and my understanding. Now, I certainly hope Microsoft doesn't disagree with me, but this is just where I've understood this, is that Fabric is the next evolution of Power BI. That's what I believe they've said. You go to powerbi.com, right? So everything is assumed in these logical containers that are Power BI-ness. So the Power BI API has gotten extended to include features native to Fabric, such as lakehouses, warehouses, which those are different.
Yeah.
Those are different. Okay. Yeah, those are different. Let's just try to get it all straight here. Oh my goodness. How you create them, how you create links between them, what's are called shortcuts, things of that nature for setting up the infrastructure. And kind of the big takeaway from there is that there was a radical difference, at least in the time that I was doing it, in capabilities based on authentication methods. When you authenticate to an API, there's at least in Microsoft Verse, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can do it as a person, so like as Ryan Brown or whomever, right? Pick your person. Or you can authenticate with essentially a service account, right? So like they call it an application registration, and this is something that you do in Entra ID, which is the registry of all the stuff that you can put things in here and say, well, I'm this application, I have permissions to do this thing. So there was a radical difference in what at the time, right? It's always changing, so maybe they fixed it, certainly maybe even by this recording, right? Or in the future, as your listeners look at this. So this may not be the situation that we find ourselves in at some point. But at the time, there was a massive difference in capabilities based upon authentication mechanism, where you had to authenticate basically as a user to do anything, and then so that a lot of stuff straight up didn't work. Like straight up, like you can't do this right now, or these endpoints don't exist, and da 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 da. So from that was mostly focused on like this automated deployment falls into CI/CD, right? So as data engineers, some of the things, not all the things, certainly not all the things of what we do, but some of the things we do is we have to take our infrastructure and it has to move it from environment to environment, dev to test to prod to prod, and then prod's where things break on Friday afternoons, which is yeah. So that is kind of that, and then my deliverable from that was just a report of like basically a report of here's the endpoints, what do they do, what do we think about them, right? So that was
In a
that
landscape
project.
where many organizations are adopting modern data platforms, what unique considerations should teams keep in mind when dealing with legacy SQL architecture?
One I'm working on right now is for a manufacturing organization, and it's a standard EDW ETL project. So bread and butter ETL project. And the interesting, at least is the interesting point to me, and then maybe interesting, we may want to, if we want to talk about it, we can, thing is about the implementation and their stack, right? So they are operating three they're operating three SQL servers, Azure SQL managed instances. So they're like legitimately SQL servers. And the entirety of their stack is focused in and around those. Azure Data Factory is what does the orchestration for moving everything, and everything's Sprox. And I say Sprox specifically because I know that's an older way of saying it. So I'm having some fun with that. And then stored procedures that Sprox that generate other SQL and things of that nature. And this is a architecture that, and this is really interesting from an architecture perspective, because the whole vibe, and it's not without cause, and it's not without reason, of course, right? The whole vibe of the industry, it feels like right now, and especially when you look at LinkedIn, you look at it and everybody's like, oh my gosh, let's bow down to Databricks, bow down to Snowflake, bow down potentially to Fabric, although Fabric's still developing, Fabric's still maturing. So they are a notable exception to that architectural pattern, because they're notably using SQL servers, and this is a multinational organization. So that's really interesting to be a part of, because it puts out the the difference of perspective, right? Because we grow and we see with contrasts as well as similarities, but with contrasts, as like why do we need these massive platforms? Right? Why do we need these vendors? Why do we need this stuff? Now, there are notable quirks on top of that, because now everything is SQL Server dependent, and there's hilarious things that sometimes can happen on that based upon little tweaks between the versions or little tweaks between the stuff. Because I kid you not, this literally happened last week, that SQL code that worked beautifully in dev, worked beautifully in QA, literally failed in prod. I'm like, of all the environments, of everywhere it had to crap out, it's prod. And it's an hour and a half bridge with the DBA, and we are just like trying to look for like why, and it gives us this error that we've never seen before about the size of the table, and what are we even what even is this? And it's not even the whole script. It's literally one line of a merge statement that turns out to be one of the most important elements of the merge statement, because it's the win not statement, and that's where we were in this particular case implementing a soft delete mechanism. And for this particular table, we needed to implement a soft delete mechanism, and so it's like kind of the point. It was a big thing I had to do, because the way that it was working is that there was records that were in the EDW that were not in the source, but we still needed to keep them, but we needed to mark them as an active, right? So kind of a type 2 change type vibe, right? And that was the requirement. We needed to do that, and it's like why is this not? we have no idea. We don't understand why, but we ended up having to figure out that like, oh, there's this option that you have to set for the SQL optimizer of all things to give us a rigorous, or there was like a particular code, creating a keyword that says like rigorous plan or something. I don't know what exactly it was, but it was like telling the SQL optimizer to make sure when it makes the plan to not make the table bigger than it's supposed to be. And this is in prod on a Friday. It's literally in production on a Friday when the business users are like, hey, these tables are empty. And I'm like, what? These tables have no data. No. Right. So it literally prod breaks on Friday. And we have to go do this. So there is, yeah, that was a today I learned. Like, what? Why? How? How is one version of SQL Server different than the other version? So there are stuff that you're going to have with that you would not necessarily have in Databricks, but Databricks is going to have its own quirks. There's the provisioning the clusters and setting up your clusters and getting your init scripts and stuff like that. You get writing your Spark, transitioning from Spark SQL potentially to T SQL and da 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 da.
Nice. Legacy pipelines are easily uber complex. How have you approached simplifying complex data workflows in your career?
I think about some of my proudest moments in my career. So on my LinkedIn headline, as of this writing, it says Azure data pipelines from hundreds to 20s or whatever it was. Right. So I was working for a large cloud and computing vendor. And the stack was Azure Data Factory and Databricks, and everything was individual pipelines that were tied to individual tables, but there were logical groupings of things that we could do. So in consultation with my lead, we simplified the entire process by grouping the logical operations into basically these mini pipelines and with case activities in Azure Data Factory, and then built up a config file that would say, okay, here's all the source destination. So we basically took the orchestration up a layer in abstraction, and then we were able to take all those objects and compress them. From there was like 100 pipelines, and they were 7 steps deep. 7, like this pipeline executes this pipeline, which executes this pipeline, which executes this pipeline. And I cannot make heads or tails of this infra.
Yeah.
But we were able to, and I was able to build the framework necessary to turn that into a metadata-driven construct, which is that was a much simpler piece to
Can you share your experiences with implementing innovative solutions in data engineering and how these solutions improved operational efficiency?
The thing I'm proud of is this was data engineering, but it kind of crossed over a little bit into data science, because the use case was that users would submit a list of names, addresses, things, contact information, something, right? And then we had to check whether is this list in the stuff that we already have. And we had to do it with fuzzy matching, because there's hand entry of these things, and from the database, someone could have fat fingered something, right? So the requirement is fuzzy matching, and then the client had their own implementation of fuzzy matching. So it's really fascinating to learn about, using something called cosine similarity, which is a big math thing that I was that years old when I learned about this. Like, what is the linear algebra? Oh my gosh! But it's a way to compute the variance between two strings. it like converts them into a matrix, and then it does some comparison. I does some fancy stuff. I have no idea. All I know, I wrote the methods. I don't know why I did it. This was a script that was running on-prem that was all in pandas. So in pandas, it was all single memory, and the majority of the time in running it was the actual loading of the CSVs into memory. The actual computation didn't take that long. And so what I did, I was in charge of, was migrating it to Databricks and to Spark. And so most of it, hilariously, this was an actual really hilarious, like things that you don't expect for 500 if we're going off of the Jeopardy game show vibes here, is what we didn't expect, me and my team didn't expect, was that parallelizing the actual cosine similarity computation operation didn't actually improve performance.
Oh.
To this day, I don't know why. This is one of those cases of it works. Why it doesn't work? Why I don't know. And but we were able to parallelize the load of reading it from disk, reading it from storage. We were able to parallelize the generation of the final output. But we were not able to parallelize the actual cosine computation. So to this day, last I heard, they were still using a big driver, because it was computing everything on the driver. But that, all in all, that took a process that took a day, because from a business process perspective, for the business users, they would have to submit their files before a certain time, and then it would run overnight, which is a pretty normal process. But we were able to take that, and through my team's work, what we all did together, we were able to turn that into a Power App. And then I wrote the Databricks pieces, so it would Power Apps would send a call to the Databricks Jobs API that would kick off the notebooks, and then I was literally using the Databricks commands to write the actual CSV. So not like normally when you write a data frame, it creates a directory and then it creates the files underneath. But we had to use the Databricks pieces to actually write. I think I wrote it to Databricks file system first, and then I had to use a CP to like put it over to, or move it to the staging area where Power Apps would then take it out. So in terms of experience of the different types of projects I've done and the things that I've delivered, that's what I would say kind of I've done in my kind of whole focus. How can I forget? How can I forget? I'm sorry. That there's my very first ever gig was a supply chain analyst at an envelope company.
Yeah.
And this was way before I was a consultant. This was again using SQL Server, but here's the stack: a SQL Server on a machine on my desk, because it was all shadow IT. It just ended up growing. I just ended up pushing the boundaries. And then by the end of it, I had a SQL server on my desk, a Ubuntu server on my desk. I even have them as mementos in my closet there from this time. Not even SQL Server Schedule. I was using SQL Server Express Edition, with a script that I wrote, because at the time I'd been programming some in VBA. So I wrote a Visual Basic script to read SQL files from disk and execute them against the SQL server and trigger everything with Windows Task Scheduler. So we're talking pretty jank at this point. This is really, really jank, but it was free, right? This was jank, and I built a little data mart and a little Jupyter Hub powered front end for reporting and data sets that I served to the supply chain group. They didn't have something like that. They were having to go against the ERP, and the company had their broader BI strategy, and their broader BI strategy kind of sucked. And so I built a different thing, right, for them. So in terms of the various things that I've done, that's kind of what I would say is kind of the highlight reel. And the theme in my career has been, let's do this more technically, let's do this better, let's do this more optimized. Has been kind of where I've been.
So, can you share some key learnings from managing data systems at scale, particularly in the context of financial data?
Okay. Well, I actually haven't managed data systems at scale in the context of financial data,
Okay.
right? Right. My interest is pushing into financial data and financial awareness as practitioners, right? As practitioners. I mean, in a sense of like, okay, have I managed systems where we're dealing with orders? Yes, right? Orders, and those have a financial component, right? But that's going to be from my experience. It's how you manage any other data flow. But maybe it's not maybe an underwhelming answer, but
No.
like so that I hope that at least provides something.
Yeah. That's nice because you just mentioned about something there which has a possibility at least.
Right. Yeah. So my hope is to get into that, right? Where I want to take my career next is a really hard focus on building the infra. Yes, building it awesome, building it technically, building it optimized, right? But building it in such a way that is financially viable and beneficial for the business. Because it's because at the end of the day, all of us as practitioners, right? All of us practitioners, data engineers, analysts, machine learning people, all of us, right?
Yes.
All of us.
Absolutely.
We are charged, and we have to provide monetary value to the business. That's is like, what are we being paid for?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Now, obviously, us in the technical space, we're not directly on the front lines making sales and making revenues. We are in a support function, but everything that we do ties into everything our business users do, and everything our business users do drive revenue or incur costs for the business. So we have to be thinking about that. So that's where that's
This
coming
also bridges us to the next question, which is very rich in your experience. How has your experience with Azure Data Stack shaped your approach to backend infrastructure development?
So, in the sense of it's made me very like, oh, I think of things in Azure vibes, right? I mostly work with that. So when I think of orchestrators, so hilariously, like I haven't done a production deployment of Airflow.
Oh,
Like straight up in my career, I haven't touched Airflow.
wow, nice.
So that's really different, right? I have now Data Factory is pretty much like Microsoft's Airflow, and they even have managed Airflow. From what I understand, managed Airflow as a offering, right? Like you can put that in there or whatever, but it's all drag and drop and click and stuff like that, and PaaS. It's a PaaS service. So I have not done a production deployment of Airflow, right? So that's a major shaping, right? And there's a difference. I can only really speak to Azure and Google because I did kind of a small project, small kind of volunteer project with a startup that was on Google using Google Stack. And what I noticed was really rather different about the platforms is that Google is now it fits a lot with my personality because I love the technical. And it is focused on people who know their technical stuff. Like it's very like, hey, you know the technical thing, you go do the technical thing, and we're not going to handhold or make that easier for you. It's not uncommon in Google tutorials to drop down to the CLI. Now, I love that. I'm all about that. But that is a different audience versus Azure. and this is a thing I think with Microsoft in general, is that Microsoft wants to push everything down the skill level, so that now this makes sense because Microsoft is big enterprise company and they're in everywhere and they work with everywhere, so they have to. Everyone touches Microsoft at every organization. Even Google, unless Google is like the one company using Google Office. I mean, they may be. Google may be, but like Amazon, they're not using Amazon Office products. They're probably using Microsoft Office products, even though they literally make AWS, right?
Yes.
So Oracle's probably using Windows, right? So probably.
Yeah.
So they have to make everything, and they do make everything as lower skill level accessible as possible. So there's a lot more hand-holding in Azure.
Yeah.
You can use the CLI. They support a CLI. They support scripting. They love it when you do that. That CI/CD, that's where everything lives. There's a templating language, ARM and Bicep, and then there's a AZ CLI that you can do whatever you want from. PowerShell commandlets, and go knock yourself out, right? So they have that, and that's part of their vibe. But they're a lot focused on getting someone from point A to point B actualized with the least amount of friction. Is what I say. So like, and what that means, that creates both a plus and a pro and a con in some sense. Because Azure Data Factory is really easy to get started, and it's a copy. You fill in a field, and you're done. And you can run it. And you can be like, oh, sweet, I copied my data. So the great thing is that everybody can do it. The double-edged sword is that everybody can do it. And then education becomes really important, and how we think about organizing and working and thinking about things becomes important, because it could be really, really easy to end up with hundreds of pipelines, seven layers deep, and nobody knows what's going on. So there's that. So, and that's kind of how I would think about it.
Data governance is becoming increasingly important. How do you and your team ensure that data governance frameworks are not just set in place but are truly effective?
So at my current client, we're still learning and what that means and stuff like that. So data governance is basically SQL Server permissions. That's governance.
Yeah.
Grant statements, those are a thing.
Wow.
We can do them, and we're doing them. So let me talk ideally here for a second about how I think, this is just my opinion, how I think we might think about governance, right? Because governance can be kind of a two-edged sword. We need governance because not everybody's supposed to have access to things, but also people need to do their jobs, right? And it's too often, I think, that there's a where it's shifts to, oh, the answer is always no, and we can't, because then what that happens is that encourages, and I know this because I literally made a shadow IT effort, right? Is you if you're the guy just being like, no, you can't do that. No, it's going to be 5 weeks. You have to submit a ticket, and it must be formatted exactly like this, Ray. Like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy with the bureaucracy, with the different types of forms, and it's like, it's got to be formatted this way, and we have to assign the engineer, and it's going to be 3 weeks before someone executes a grant statement on a SQL database somewhere, right? You're gonna get someone trying to connect to the source directly, or someone's just gonna make it in dang Excel, and we know all data ends up in Excel. So we have to strike a balance we have to strike a balance where, yes, we protect, because we do. We absolutely do. That's unequivocal. That's non-negotiable. We have to protect.
Yeah.
And we can't just be in the way. It's both. So my ideal data governance framework is some type of really automated process behind the scenes that's tied with people's security groups and the bottlenecks are always people, right?
Yeah.
Bottlenecks maybe, but in my experience, a lot of the bottlenecks are people and people with too much on their plate, right? So in my mind, as automated as possible. In the Microsoft space, you tie this with security groups, blah, 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 blah. But you have to get to some type of really automated solution that really ties was like the soon as someone in the organization makes a decision, okay, Ryan, you now have access to this, right? Then that's carried out. Right? Because in my experience, a lot of issues actually that especially on consulting projects, ties with governance is just getting access to the dang stuff.
Yeah.
Like I get on a new project, it's 5 weeks or a month before I have access to something because it's tied up in somebody's court or the request wasn't formatted the right way and yada, 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 yada. And then all of a sudden, okay, I'm just billing, but I'm not doing anything. But
exactly.
I just go take, I just take a chai in the middle of the day. I don't care, right? Right? Like, it's like, I'm not doing anything, and I can't do anything because you literally won't let me do anything.
Exactly. What are the key elements you consider essential in building effective ETL pipelines, especially when dealing with complex data sources?
Okay, perfect. Love it, love it, love it, love it. So the first thing I would think about is modularity. Okay, so when we build our infrastructure, it's great in my mind to write once, use multiple times.
Nice.
Right? Design the implement, right? I in your kitchen, if you have your kitchen, is you can get a optimized appliance for a particular thing. Like you just pick whatever favorite dish you may want, and there's a machine that's dedicated that does that thing, whatever we think about it, right?
Yeah.
And it can be really, really, really good for that thing, right? But that's only going to be useful for that one thing.
Yeah.
Right. And so then you spend the money, you get the appliance, and it does that one thing. But now you want to make something else.
Yeah.
Right. Now all of a sudden you need another tool. Versus if you had a tool that I could use, and I'll just say, for example, if you had a kitchen knife or whatever, kitchen knife, I can use this to prepare, whatever dish I want, whatever curry I want, whatever. I love paneer, so cut my paneer for my curry or whatever it is. I love Indian food; it's wonderful. Yeah. There's lots of Indians where I live, so we have like all these restaurants. It's amazing. I love it so much. So like a general implement, right? That can be used to accomplish many sorts of tasks, right? So then when we create something like a loader, like we have like a loading function that one of our sources are SQL servers. There's different SQL servers, but we have 4 or 5 of them, let's just say, in the organization for this example, right? Well, let's write one function that takes arguments to connect to a SQL server, but we don't write functions that connect to every single SQL server separately.
Yeah.
Like, don't do that. Why would we do that? And logically grouping things, loading from a SQL server, writing to an Azure Data Lake store, organizing it into a fact table, right? Like we're supposed to have these things, things that anytime that we can group operations together and embed that into our infrastructure from an ETL perspective, ELT2, right? Technically, however way we want to work with this, we do well, in my opinion.
Nice.
Right? Because we write once, we use multiple places. We have a config where we say the specific thing. We put that config in source control. We can have the blame of who wrote this, and who did this, and da 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 da. We can do that. So modularity is, I think, one of the most important things.
Nice.
And that kind of dovetails into, like, I guess the configurability of, like, have your configs, make it modular, do configs as code, have your configs available in source control. People can view them, you can check them, and that's where you can put the kind of little bespoke pieces, because everything is an edge case. It's both. There's commonalities, and literally every darn thing is an edge case. Like, there's always an edge. Everything has something edge case. Like the flipping SQL Server Friday night. Why does this SQL optimizer plan say it's making the table bigger? I don't understand.
Nice.
But yeah, so where we embed, you have and that configuration file embeds the embeds the bespoke, embeds the variance, embeds the edge case.
Yeah.
And then the next thing I think about is some type of testing, right? Some type of testing. Did this right? Is this writing the same way? Like, I'm actually probably going to be revamping a process at the to surface errors, surface things that for the client, because I've spent literally 5 weeks literally copying out the SQL code for a 9-10 activity ADF pipeline that is like running sprocs to create sprocs, to pull from SAP, to pulls from SAP to ADLS, to model map things together and stuff like that. And you've got a one sproc that fails, that doesn't have a lot of assertions right now of what the particular pieces are, and is tied down to like one other table downstream that's supposed to have something that isn't as noted, right? So this is a real example of where testing, assertions, clarity of this is exactly what I expect to happen here, embedded not just in the technical, not just the technical pieces of like, did this write to disk, right? But when I do this, Azure Data Factory has a lookup activity where you pull from something and it pulls it into memory in the pipeline. When I do this lookup activity, I pull this result from this external system. In this particular example, it's SAP, but you throw in whatever source system, right? Like if you're doing a map from a source to a thing, right? You're going against the data dictionary, the information schema, the whatever the heck you want to call it, right, of the source. And I say, okay, I'm going to here and I'm pulling the things, and I have a list of what I'm expecting to pull and a list of what I found. These things should match.
Yes.
And if they don't match, Houston, we have a problem. Right? Yeah, we have a problem, because obviously if I'm requesting table 1, 2, 3 from the source system from SAP, and SAP says, bro, I don't have that, obviously I cannot do ETL with it.
Yes.
That's not something that's going to happen. And now and then that needs to go back to the business and say, guys, you said you wanted this table. This table's not a thing yet. We're not in this table. We're not in this table exists era.
Yeah.
We're not there yet. So you need to either make the table or like give us the right name.
Yeah.
Right. Like testability, assertions, what we expect to happen, what we think about supposed to happen, is kind of those 3 things that I would really have to think about. In this particular, this really valuable for complex pieces, right? Because we expect to see X, Y, Z, right? Can we validate? And this is something where there's the idea of data contracts. I've never implemented a data contract, but I really like the idea of a data contract.
Yeah.
Now the hard thing with data contracts is that like you're trying to button down and define something, then the business needs to move faster. So it's a both and here, but I understand why we think about data contracts and why we like data contracts.
Yes.
And then there are cases where maybe not, I don't know if it's on the presentation layer where the business users have to deal with stuff a lot of times, but certainly on the source, like if the raw ETL or the raw ELT or whatever it is, right? We're pulling the raw stuff that can and maybe should have more of a data contractual type of relationship, right? But we get testing. Is this doing what I think it's supposed to be doing every time? Right? Because I cannot tell you how, oh, this failed. What? Why? How? Where is the failure? I don't even know, right? Like that's not info that we want to be dealing with, right? As data.
Right.
So that helps.
We would like to know your take on how to grow as a data or analytics engineer. And bang on, first question: what are the things you love to work as a data engineer now, and what are some things you want to explore?
Oh, perfect. Yeah, because it'll go back to something that I mentioned earlier, which is so what I love to work with. I mean, my career has been Azure. I'm not super married to Azure. That's just the way that my career kind of flowed, right? Because you do a job to get paid. So you do your job, you build your skills to get paid. So I'm not particularly married, like, oh, Azure, my love. No, that's not the type of relationship that we have here. I am not in my Azure lover era. I love working with. There's two things. I love working with the big data platforms. That's super fun. But I also like working with in a weird way, I love working with the SQL servers of the world.
Nice.
Right? Like the forgotten data stacks. Like you think you're not supposed to do this, right? Is something fun. I was in. You may have heard of Zach Wilson, his boot camp, all of that stuff, right? So I was in his boot camp, and I delivered for my capstone. My project was a exploration of, okay, how would I do the Databricks medallion architecture completely on-prem on people's laptops?
Nice.
And I ended up coming up with DuckDB and the Python front ends for the Rust library for Delta RS. Okay. So Delta files, so Jupyter Notebook scripts running ETL with DuckDB and polars and writing to Delta files locally on this MacBook.
Wow, nice.
Right? Because that's different. You think you're not supposed to be able to do that, but it's like, oh, technically speaking, you could do that. And I had multiple, now it was all BS data because I didn't have the access to an actual companies. But where I love focusing on what are the areas technically that we're neglecting, right? Because everybody's like Databricks, Snowflake, right? But I mean, we should know those, right? But where are we neglecting? Where are we thinking about? What's the contrast that we're missing? So that's something I love to explain. And so where I think data engineers and analytics engineers need to grow, or should be growing as they think about them, is a few areas. As I know that's the next question, is as broad technology stack, right? Around common elements, because DuckDB is a SQL database, right? It's a SQL. And so SQL's always going to be in vogue. Like no one's killing SQL. No one's killing Excel, much to my chagrin. But no one's killing Excel. But okay. We may or may not be killing Spark. I'm not sure. Spark's still really dominant. Very good to know Spark. But like what's the underlying technology that can apply in multiple areas, right? Because Fabric is managed Spark for Microsoft. Databricks is managed Spark by the makers of Spark. I don't think Snowpark exactly Spark, but I don't know I don't know that world very well, right? And then this is an active area that I'm growing in personally, literally right now, as I don't know this very well, but I'm working on it, is finance and accounting.
Nice.
Now that sounds weird, but here's why. Not to go be in the finance department, but to understand the language and elements of business that literally are the data points that every single company down to every single organization has and works with that type of stuff and is beholden to and managed by that data model, the finance data model, the accounting data model. Assets equals liabilities plus owner's equity or shareholders' equity, public company or whatever, right? Get my pocket protector, go count my beans, right? That equation, which ties to accounts, and these accounts have debits and credits, and this is a data model. This is a data model, an ancient one, whatever, 1300s, 1400s, or whatever, Medicis in Italy or whatever, as they figure out how to do this stuff, right? It is a very specific data model the world over that governs every single enterprise.
Yes.
Right? Well, here's an example. Okay. A friend of mine, known him for nearly 20 years. Wonderful guy. He started his small business. What does he like to do? Sell collectibles. Now he's restoring old Game Boys, so 1989, Game Boys, and selling them and making them work again. It's beautiful, beautiful. Okay, he has accounting. He's got sales that he goes through eBay, and he's got these stuff. Like him and his wife, this little talk about small business. They have an accounting data model.
Yeah.
Data there is relevant for them.
Yes.
Right? They don't have these fancy systems and data. Wife's making a little Excel spreadsheet of the little pieces of the data of the things that they're tracking of their inventory and stuff like that. It's all in Excel for them, right? But it's all tied with accounting and money.
Nice. Yes.
And a business of two.
Yeah.
Run out of a more rural place in Minnesota, right? All the way up to your I don't know, Tata's a big company out there, right?
Yeah.
So they have accountants, they have financial data, they or whatever. Name your other big Indian company, right? Whatever an Indian.
Yeah, Reliance, Geo.
Yeah. So they live and die by their finance.
Yes.
They don't live and die by their. I mean, yes, you still need to produce them, but they don't live by their dashboards. Sadly, a lot of dashboards never even get looked at.
Yes.
You spend your time and you craft the perfect Power BI thing and nobody looks at it, right? Because it's not aligned to the thing that they actually care about.
Yes.
Which is increasing revenue or decreasing costs. I don't have the answer yet for this. I don't know how to do this, but I'm working on building that, and because that's I think where and yes, data people need to know AI too, right? I've been experimenting with Crew AI, with agentic AI flows. It's cool. Go do it. Go grab yourself a model from Hugging Face, figure out how to run it, Olama or whatever on your machine. Yes, go do that. You need to do that. Absolutely, 100%, right? And that is it going to do everything that we do? Maybe, maybe not, but yeah, definitely explore that, right? But all of these things, every single one of the things, the use of AI, the use of Databricks, the use of SQL Server, the use of DuckDB, whatever you want, all of these tie back to, in your case, rupees, right?
Yeah.
It's going to tie back to the rupees. My case will tie back to the USD. Whatever country you're working in. If you're avant-garde, it'll tie back to your Bitcoin or your Litecoin.
Yeah.
Or if you're an Elon fanboy, you're going to tie back to your Doge. I don't know, right? Right.
Yeah.
Accounting Dogecoin, wouldn't that be something? But all of this ties back to this.
Yes.
And so as data professionals, no, we're not going to be finance people, but we need to know how this works.
Yes.
We need to know how we're valuable. We need to be able to tie the things that we're delivering to the business processes that impact those things. Because either A, we don't want to be working on stuff that isn't building people value, or B, we want to be able to provide context into what we have. Matt Martin, a wonderful voice in data engineering. He had a little post where he's talking about himself being the next level of being a data engineer, literally was doing analysis on the short end of on the source system. It was on customer service calls and saying, they're saying that the company said, oh, we want to find out who's closing tickets. We want to set a standard for how fast you have to close a ticket. But he dug into the source information and said, okay, the numbers are being inflated by people literally opening the tickets and just closing them really quickly and not solving the problem.
Yeah.
Right. And that's an element of business process impact that and customer service ties with the efficiency of the organization, that ties with people's jobs, that all of that stuff ties back to money. So that's where, and that's a little bit of a different take, but that's where I'm convinced that's where I need to be as a professional of finance, accounting, dollars, rupees, whatever, for the business, with the pipeline. Like, this is $1 million pipeline. Not because it costs $1 million, but because it provides $1 million, as an example, of the business, because the data that it provides and the organization that it does and the business process that it supports is worth $1 million.
Yes.
Or rupee. Right.
And
so that's what.
That was lovely, because you just define how every effort counts into generating business value.
Every single one. Does it make the company more revenue? Does it decrease the company's costs, which therefore it increases the profitability? Yeah. If it doesn't do any one of these two things, why are you doing it?
Yes, absolutely. It would be interesting. When exploring new tools, how can data engineers assess their fitness for the project they're using the tool? Also, could you share an example of a recent tool you evaluated and your decision-making process behind its adoption or rejection?
Okay. So how I would think about it is going to be tied with kind of my whole vibe, which is fitness is going to be, in my mind, it's going to be how much does the tool cost, right? Right, because that's a cost that the business takes on.
Yes.
And that's not just the cost of the tool; that's the cost of the people involved in maintaining it, right?
Yeah.
And things like expertise available in the marketplace. Now, the downside of this is that automatically selects you for stuff that's really highly supported, and that creates a kind of groupthink in the organization. So I really respect the mavericks who say, well, no, we're going to run DuckDB, right? And is something that you really can and should be thinking about. But that is something you want to be thinking about. Is the cost of running it, the cost of the people running it, the learning curve associated with it, how quickly and are we going to be able to get people to work with this? How does it fit? There could be other things like, how does it fit with the other vendor landscape? Is there going to be complexities involving that? This is where I think ultimately, when Microsoft gets Fabric fully baked, it's going to have a really formidable challenge to Databricks and Snowflake, because Databricks and Snowflake are outside partners. Fabric is Microsoft, right? No one got fired for the old phrase was no one got fired for buying IBM. Now the vibe is no one got fired for buying Microsoft. Yeah. Right. Doesn't mean that Fabric would necessarily even be best of breed, right? But it's going to have that advantage there. So, well, here's a way. I wasn't in charge of the adoption decision, but here's something that I can bring to your listeners and your viewers about a tool adoption. Is actually the Fabric to Databricks migration for a prior client, right? The main thing was that Fabric wasn't baked yet, and Databricks was much more mature. So tool maturity, ecosystem, etc., is going to be, and then there's already going to be there could be things like particular features, like Databricks has its Photon engine and whatnot. That's not quite open source yet. Blah 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 blah. But there's going to be things like that. But if I were in charge of evaluating tools, I'd be thinking a lot about the cost and how we would organize it specifically to increase revenue, decrease costs. And I am personally less interested in the vendor's salespeople waxing poetically about this and that feature, when underlying it, we all know it's either a SQL DB, a Spark thing, da 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 da. Like, I get it. There's, I could roll my own Spark, and have like my complete control or whatever. I may not want to do that. But that doesn't mean that my main focus in going to Databricks is because you have all this, bells and whistles or whatever. So that's kind of what I would say.
That's really nice because you just connected the dots for everyone. Whatever you are pitching, you have to pitch value, and that should come out of increased revenue or decreased cost. Makes sense. Totally.
Fundamentally,
Yeah.
everything has to go through that lens.
Yes.
And then everything, and depending on your role, if you're really junior, you're not going to be, making that decision,
Yeah.
right? But you should be thinking about that as junior. And as you
Mhm.
get to senior and staff and you get above, right, you're going to be making more of those decisions, right?
Yeah. Given ADF is one of those tools which is embedded in a data engineer's day to day. So, what are some of the recurrent challenges you have experienced with it, and how would you recommend overcoming them?
Well, my biggest challenge and bugaboo with ADF is that it's a PaaS system, and and this is where, hilariously, if I worked more with Airflow, I might have more positive things to say about Airflow. But I've literally never done an Airflow implementation, so I can't really speak to it. Is is My biggest bugaboo with ADF is that if you're using the out of the box connectors, you get these cryptic errors that, like, you don't know what's happening or whatnot, because under the hood, I don't know if this is actually true, but my impression is it's like when you make an ADF pipeline, what you're really doing is you're making you're making a JSON specification. Okay. And you can see this. And when you use the Git integration for ADF and also for Fabric, right? Everything is a JSON representation of all of the pieces, all of your dependencies. Everything will be there. So my idea, I haven't confirmed this from a Microsoft person, but I have this sneaking suspicion that there's some API JSON payload thing internally where your pipeline is being submitted and then it's running some C# based integration code behind the scenes to do that. So what that means then is that you don't have visibility into actually what was the problem. And to a degree, you can't fix it. So how I've seen this worked around and how I like to work around it personally is try as much as you can to use ADF as the executor, but just execute your own scripts, right?
Nice.
Execute your own storage procedures as much as you can. Because that way you can implement whatever testing logic you want, whatever visibility you want. And if something fails, you have the authority to go in and fix it.
Yes, that's good. What factors do you consider for optimizing the data workflows to support financial analysis and decision making?
Financial analysis and decision making optimizations. So financial analysis and decision making, that's actually, so when we think about optimizations, there's kind of two different questions there. One is, how does the infra work to be quick, right? Which is important. Quick, reliable, right? Which that's present across all domains. Right? And so for that, you think about things like, things like, don't be spitting out a bunch of teeny tiny files to run against a Spark job. Like, come on. Let's try to avoid the small file problem. Right? Let's try to parallelize where we can. I've used situations where you have a for each loop activity in ADF, and then you have a copy activity. Okay, those things can do work where you say, okay, set a batch size of 10 or 20 or something like that, as much as you can handle, right? And then get that to work quickly. Those are things that I think about. I mean, yes, you can optimize your Spark jobs with bucket joins and broadcast joins, and those things are good to know. A lot of times you may or not need them. A weird thing that I've noticed about a lot of company data is that it's not very big.
Oh,
Like a couple of clients ago, the entire company data was like 300, less than 300 gigs.
wow, nice,
The
interesting.
entire organization. So you're like, in this, and this particular company was a national insurance broker,
Hmm.
a national insurance broker. So I'm like, wait a minute. Okay, the Zach Wilson's big tech people of the world, right? They are working with truly big data,
Hmm.
right? Zach Wilson, wonderful guy.
Hmm.
Go do his boot camp. Follow his content on all platforms. And
Yeah.
follow me. Uh, but uh, um, but yeah, big shout out to Zach Wilson.
Nice.
Um, uh, he's working with petabytes and planet-sized data and stuff like that. So he has to think about a lot of those things. Your or your organization. I mean, like unless like maybe the Tatas of the world are doing stuff like this, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but your grocer
Hmm.
grocery retailer, whatever your Indian grocery retailer
Hmm.
or whatever, even if they're national, well, okay, yeah, in India there's lots of people, so this may be not the same thing, right? So
Yeah.
like they may not have
Hmm.
like petabytes
Hmm.
of data, right? So thinking about things on a big data tool set with parallelization and multiple clusters and multiple compute, when you're dealing with maybe 300 gigs
Hmm.
in total,
Yeah.
right? That's an optimization issue, right? Because like, why are you doing this?
Hmm.
Why are you provisioning and paying for the infrastructure when your data is not that big? So that's
Hmm.
and so then the financial analysis piece and reporting and decision making, that's a organization question. That's a metadata question,
Yeah.
which is what is the business model
Hmm.
of the organization that I'm honored to work with?
Yes.
What are the things that it does? Like, let's just imagine, okay, like what? I love railways. So the Indian Railway, there's the Indian Railway Ministry that
Hmm.
builds the rail car,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Right. So their business, well, they're a government entity, but let's just suppose, for the sake of argument, that they were private and they were producing the rail cars,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
For the sake of the fun,
Hmm.
right? Their business model is they produce the railway carriages. Uh, they're they have to sell these to the railways, and the cost components are like the steel and the this and the. So where are those components, right?
Hmm.
And so we organize and present the data that aligns to the processes that people do in a way that's leveraged and tied back to the financial statements.
Yeah.
Not saying I know how to do this, but I'm saying this is where we should be going,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
This table aligns with this process, which impacts this item on the balance sheet. And the organization not just comes from like, how do we present this tabularly, but like, what are the calculations of what we think about that impact, are the drivers of those numbers,
Hmm.
right? Because that's turning data not simply of records, right? This isn't just records. Like, why are we keeping the records? We're keeping the records because we want to get an understanding,
Hmm.
because we want to knowledge. Like, why do we do accounting in the first place? It's because it's to track where the stinking money is,
Yes.
where the money's gone,
Hmm.
and we need to maintain and understand and have the knowledge of where is our money.
Hmm.
Where's our money,
Yes.
right? So that piece is, and yes, there's going to be some optimizations in terms of how you organize your SQL queries and stuff like that. Make sure you have your rigorous plan or whatever it is set up so your table doesn't get big in SQL Server in that one version of SQL Server that I still don't know why. But yeah, yes. So that's what I would say.
Nice. That's almost a rant, but still an answer. And that's bang on.
Yes,
Love it.
right. Almost a rant, but still an answer. Yes,
Nice.
yes.
What are the top three aspects you believe are lacking in the current data engineering stack, which makes the day-to-day of data engineers challenging? Also drop in the skills and tools you think are important here.
Oh, guys, I'm going to stay on brand
Uh,
and just say the top of There isn't an easy way in any of our tool sets that I've used to link our stuff with financial outcomes.
Okay.
Now, this is kind of a little bit, there's a little bit of field, but what do we exist to do? We exist to crunch data and print profits, right? That's what we have to do as professionals.
Yeah.
In some way, form, right? You know, if it's not us as engineers, it's the analysts or it's the AI,
Yeah.
right? Working with our information, right? So we're all involved in this. So and that even is kind of a metadata question, because that's a different paradigm shift, right? It's that is not there yet, right? That's not there yet.
Yeah.
I think in terms of what else is there, you know, Fabric's not baked yet, fully baked yet, so that's kind of lacking, but that's going to come in time. I think also, I mean, it's not a lacking of the tool set, I would say, but it's a lacking of adoption and thought process. We assume Databricks, we assume Snowflake, we assume the big data processing for organizations that may, and again, this is literally a repeat of what I'm saying, like that may not have big sync. Like it's technically possible, and I know this because I did it. It's technically possible to support an entire department with a single SQL server on your desk.
Yes.
And you can modernize that with DuckDB on your machine or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So that's the thing. So then the skills comes back to the, like, I'm just gonna stay really. I'm gonna just repeat my keep hitting the dead horse there, or whatever it is you want to say. The skills are financial and accounting awareness. The skills are SQL and Python. Skills are data modeling, right? How do we model and organize the table? And then there's going to be things like, you know, modeling the tables in such a way that your stuff doesn't take forever, right? That there's an optimization to be thought of there.
And this is where we want your insights on the future of the analytics and data engineering. So the
Perfect.
first is interesting. The community is abuzz with semantic and logical models. Now, as the future of data modeling comes, have you implemented it as a concept? And what are your thoughts on this approach?
No, I have not implemented it.
Not a problem.
But I think it's cool. There's some conversation I think about ontologies.
Yes.
I'm not as super aware of them, but I think that's really cool. And I think this ties back with things like, feels to me like the next coming of metadata, of like what these things are and what these things are grouped, and these things are tied with stuff that businesses care about. That's what I could have the wrong understanding here on that, but and I think it's great. Yeah. I'm going to be learning it.
As the stack of a data engineer develops, do you see it becoming easier to understand the impact of a data engineer or the team on the key functions like the KPIs like ROI, ARR, and how?
Well, that's perfect. The only way that's going to become that is if data engineers learn finance and accounting. Enough to be able to tie it, right? You have to tie it, right? ROI is a financial metric.
Yes.
Right? If data engineers are able to do that, we'll do that. If we're not able to do that, then we're all going to get laid off with AI, or the worst case scenario, right? But because, and this happens because the business is like, we're paying you guys, we submit these tickets, you go on for 5 weeks about this and this table, and we can't tie this, or we don't see things.
Yes.
Right? But like the ROI, ARR, annual recurring revenue.
So have data catalogs made the lives of data engineers simpler in terms of resolving those piled up requests?
I don't know, because I've barely implemented any of them.
Okay, cool.
Just going to be really straight up honest with you. We had the conversation of, what was it? Purview. That's what it was. Purview, which is their catalog. On the one hand, it's really cool. You can go out and find out and ferret it out and expose it. Part of me does wonder if that's kind of solving the wrong problem.
Okay.
I wonder. This is not a fact. This is just a wondering. Yeah. My wondering is, is simply surfacing the data the issue, or is the, again, brand, is the financial linking of the data and then the surfacing the issue. What you really should, because a data catalog where we suppose we get our fancy schmancy catalog and we get all our stuff in there, but we have 5 different ways of calculating orders. 5 different spreadsheet from Martha and Puneet and whomever, right? And Shruti and Pooja and whomever in your team, and they're all not agreeing with each other, and none of them are tied with the ultimate metric, right? What have we gained? So, I mean, I'm not saying I know how to do that. I'm just wondering and poking and putting forward the question.
So the next question: how do you think data engineers can future-proof data infrastructure for handling complex or PII datasets?
Okay, this is where your modularity and your configurability comes in.
Nice.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? Because if you can structure your things in such a way to do this safely, right? Safety is the key. Where you have your modularity, but you can add on new code easily in an isolated manner to attach that, and you can document those configurations. This is kind of on the complexity side, right? I think you do well. On the PII side, right, that's really important. That's I haven't done any specific implementations with this, but I would think there may be a couple ways we might be able to think about it. There is the masking idea, but even that I've heard, like, it's still being stored in the database, right? And so if someone can get around your masking, they get the info. So I don't know. Maybe there's something where it's encrypted and with a cipher on disk, so that if anybody exposes it, they don't see it, and the decryption keys are only stored with authorized users. Maybe, I don't know, but you think for PII specifically, I would think you might want to be exploring something where we assume that everybody has access to this, because at a certain point there's going to be a failure, or quite potentially could be a failure. Under that worst case scenario, are we wrecked? Is there a leak?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, in that worst case scenario, you've done well.
Yeah.
Might be my way of thinking about it.
Nice.
I don't know.
Just the way you said it, the yes and no thing, it has to be that clear. There should be no gray line in between.
Oh, gray area. If everything was leaked from your data, this is not just PII, right? This could be all kinds of stuff, right? Like every single thing, and if your data gets out on the internet tomorrow from your storage account or from your SQL server or from wherever, if your company's screwed as a result, maybe there's an issue with how you stored the data and how you wrote the data.
Have you heard about or worked with data products? Yes, no, then we have if it.
I've heard a little bit about them.
Okay. And
I like the concept. And I especially like the concept. We'll go this back to branding. Is if they're products, it means we can sell them. Nice. If they're products, it means they have an ROI. If they're products, they help help you, and this ties with the value, right? There's a vibe, an idea in the manufacturing community from Deming's work about Six Sigma stuff of waste, where in the manufacturing process, we want to minimize the production of waste, and waste is something that a customer is not willing to pay for. Okay, so maybe, don't know, But maybe if we produce a data product, that's manufacturing in some sense, right? We're fabricating something.
Yeah.
Not quite the same, but we work around with the analogy a little bit here. Are our end users willing to pay for it?
Nice.
If they're willing to pay for it because it brings them greater ROI, maybe we've done well.
Yes. And
I don't know, but maybe.
interestingly, if such a thing is happening, then how would a typical analytics engineer understand or use such a data product?
Okay, well, I mean, from what I understand, like, okay, if we make a product which is like, okay, we understand, and from what I understand about data products would be like, okay, here's the dashboard is a data product, the data set's a data product. We could be thinking about that. In my mind, it goes back to, okay, we'll just use the fictional railway carriage people, an example. Railway company, this foundry, this factory makes these things. Their business process is the people putting the bogies and the things together to make the carriages. My data product for that factory is an organized table of the timings and the flow in the workshop of every single piece against the schedule, and which is tied to exactly the goals of the plant manager. Right? The plant manager has their metrics. Their plant manager has their goals. We organize the data set around a data set or data sets, models, whatever, right, around those goals, and make it easy. Outliers, anomalies, because a lot of the stuff in management is what's going poorly. Surface the stuff that's going poorly. Surface the stuff that's going well. Compute your averages to say this is what it is, something like that maybe.
Nice.
But it's aligned to what the plant manager needs to see to do their job, that if I were in their shoes, that then I could just execute and make these decisions that were benefiting the plant or whatever, right? Is how I think about that.
What details would you like to look at in a good data product?
What financial pieces it ties to.
Beautiful.
Right, like what does it tie to specifically, and what business process does it tie to, and what's the mapping? What's the mapping?
What are your go-to resources or communities for staying updated on latest developments or analytics tools and similar technologies like data products?
I just check LinkedIn, bro.
Yeah.
LinkedIn's amazing. Zach Wilson. Follow Zach Wilson, right? Yeah, follow Zach Wilson. And you kind of get into, the more you follow people on LinkedIn, start showing you more people. Lots of these people typically have Substacks, and you can read their Substacks.
Now we are to the real route. So how do you maintain a healthy work-life balance? Also, some recent feel-good moments, like a road trip, keeping you joyful and motivated.
So here's some fun things, because I like to do these things outside of it. So I'm see if this will take. So these are copywork notebooks where I am copying things in 3 languages for my own personal language study, because that's what I love to do in my free time. It's Japanese is here, Chinese is here, and Thai is here.
Wow, amazing.
Now Thai is kind of fun because it's a okay, Liz, can I get this to show? Thai is kind of fun because Thai is a Indic influenced language. So so this is the first time I'm exploring that, of like, oh, you have a consonant and the vowels go around it. And so they're like, when the articles are like, oh, they're like comparing it to Devanagari or whatever, or maybe I may have said that wrong, but like one of the Indic scripts. There we go. Right. And how the consonants work, and stuff like that, and that the influence of that, because Thailand's part of the Indosphere, and you can see the influence of that. So that's super fun.
That is lovely.
that's a feel good moment. Another feel good moment.
Yeah.
Working on my brands and stuff behind the scene. I will have a launch at some point here about things, and so definitely stay tuned for that. I'm not going to give away all of it right here in the interview, but stay tuned.
Thank you for joining us on Season 1 of Analytics Heroes. For more information, visit moderndata101.com, or you can also find us Analytics Heroes on Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts. Click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And on behalf of the team here at Modern, thanks for listening.